This episode is presented by Invest Puerto Rico. If you believe your business can go anywhere, Puerto Rico is the place.
Hello and welcome back to Equity, TechCrunch's flagship podcast about the business of startups. Today is May 28th, 2024, and I am Becca Skutak, a senior reporter here at TechCrunch. We're kicking off the week a day late due to the holiday weekend here in the US, so let's get caught up. On today's show, we have xAI's $6 billion funding round, Synapse's bankruptcy and what that means for other fintech startups, pre-bunking with Google, and a pitch deck teardown for Berlin-based startup TerraOne. Let's get started. Kick things off, those of you dear listeners who track tech earnings this week, there are definitely a couple worth keeping your eye on. To start, we've got Salesforce, UiPath, and HP all reporting tomorrow. And then we have Asana and MongoDB reporting on Thursday. And now on to the big news that matters. For the first story of the day, we have news about Elon Musk. And no, it is not about Twitter. No, it is not about Tesla. It is about that fifth, sixth, or seventh company that Elon Musk also runs called xAI. The company announced that it raised $6 billion in new funding at a $18 billion pre-money valuation. This confirms reporting that TechCrunch had earlier in April. The backers for this deal include Andreessen Horowitz, Sequoia Capital, and Valor, among others. You may notice, dear listeners, those are a lot of the same investors who helped Musk buy Twitter a couple years ago. But according to some reporting from Dan Primack over at Axios, he confirms that this is all new cash in this deal. There's no overlap based on the past deal, but the same investors came back a second time around. In a blog post, xAI said it plans to use the capital to build its first set of products and take them to market, build some advanced infrastructure, and accelerate the research and development of what it plans to do in the future. While you may have already seen Grok on your Twitter feed or on your sidebar on X, xAI says it hopes to be able to introduce Grok to users beyond X as well. This move, of course, will help Musk in competing with the likes of OpenAI, which he co-founded, Microsoft, and Alphabet. And next up, we are talking about banking-as-a-service fintech startup Synapse, which has recently collapsed. The San Francisco-based fintech operated a service that allowed many other companies, mainly fintech startups, to embed banking services into their offerings. The startup has run into financial trouble and filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in April, but has since had to update that to Chapter 7 bankruptcy and is close to being forced to liquidate entirely. While the financial fate of one startup isn't necessarily always big news in the grand scheme of startup land, in this case, Synapse's news is because of how interdependent it is with other fintech companies. We saw the first example of this already. Last week, teen banking-focused Copper announced that due to Synapse's bankruptcy, it had to pause its banking and debit services. Well, thankfully, in Copper's case, this will only be temporary as it moves to another service provider. This just shows the first of likely many ripple effects we're going to see from this Synapse news in the weeks to come. As our dear friend Mary Ann Azevedo put it, though certainly not the only bit of bad news, it shows just how treacherous things are for the often interdependent fintech world when one key player hits trouble. I'm sure we'll have more stories and more updates on this in episodes to come.
What's next in tech? That's not the right question. It's where. Puerto Rico, where an entrepreneurial ecosystem pulses with connectivity, capability, and possibility, where the most competitive tax incentives in the U.S. fast-track success, and hard work is rewarded with sunsets and turquoise waters. If you believe your business can go anywhere, Puerto Rico is the place. investpr.org/TechCrunch.
And one last thing before we head into today's pitch deck teardown. The Washington Post reports that election officials and researchers from Arizona to Taiwan are adopting an approach called pre-bunking to battle misinformation. If you're unaware of what that is, which I was until about an hour ago this morning, to quote the Washington Post, pre-bunking is weakened doses of misinformation paired with explanations and are aimed at helping the public develop mental antibodies to recognize and fend off hoaxes in a heated election year, end quote. Google has done a bit of this themselves. They ran a bunch of cartoon ads on YouTube, IG, and Facebook called Pre-bunking with Google in a lead up to the European Union election, highlighting common methods of spreading misinformation via email and social media. I think this is an interesting approach. I would love to say I think this is going to work, but as someone who has seen people firsthand take a tiny bit of misinformation and run with it way further than you ever thought they could, I am a little bit skeptical about this. And that's it for me this morning, but keep an eye out on TechCrunch throughout the week for more tech, startup, and venture news. As always, if you want to dive deeper into anything we talked about today, we'll have links to all the stories we covered in the show notes. Now let's check in with Haya Camps for today's pitch deck teardown.
Thank you. All right, everyone, it's time for another pitch deck teardown. This week, we're looking at TerraOne's deck. So, there's this startup in Berlin called TerraOne. They've got a mission. Make sure we're not wasting all of this clean energy. You know, the stuff that comes from the sun and the wind. It turns out Germany has got a bit of a problem with storing it all, and so a lot of it goes to waste. But TerraOne has a plan. They're building these battery storage systems to keep all of that tree-hugging green energy safe and sound. And guess what? They just raised a cool $7.5 million to make it happen. Now, the pitch deck is only 13 slides long, but let me tell you, it's packed with almost everything you need. But not quite. I'll get to that in just a moment. Here's what works. First up, I really like their problem statement. It hits you like a ton of bricks. The slide throws some impressive numbers at you, making it crystal clear that this is a problem, not just a minor inconvenience. And I'm going to be honest, I usually roll my eyes at multiple problem slides, but here's what TerraOne did differently. The additional slides explain why this problem isn't going to solve itself, and it leaves us with the opportunity for why this company is going to be huge. The other thing I really liked was they had a solid strategic take on the solution. Startups, I've said it before and I'll say it again, investors don't actually care nearly as much about your product as you think they do. They want to see the big picture, and the slide in this deck completely nails that. The deck does have a couple of lines about proven technology and being profitable without subsidies and lower costs. That's all lovely, but they don't really connect the dots for us, so there's a little bit of an opportunity for improvement there as well. It's a great start, but it could set themselves up for better traction, moat and defendability, and solution slides. The other thing I really liked is that the company completely nailed the product slide. It doesn't fall into the usual trap of drowning us in technical detail. The slide actually explains what TerraOne does without making me want to gouge my eyes out. That point, however, leads us perfectly into the 3 things that the deck could do to improve. First up is the business model slide. It feels a little bit like we're solving a mystery over here. It should lay things out simply. How does TerraOne find its customers? What's the sale process? And how is it going to make money? On that note, it's worth talking about the pricing. Right now, the deck doesn't explain how much it's planning to charge its customers, which is a bit of a problem because the pricing really speaks to the positioning in the market and who the customers are going to be. For me as an investor, it helps if the company can explain the pricing. Without it, it's like trying to guess the price of a meal at the restaurant without a menu. The other thing worth paying attention to is unit economics. What I mean by unit economics is how the cost of delivering the service shifts as the company hits its stride. It'd be very helpful to explain how the costs change as the company hits scale. So as it's growing, will it become more efficient and profitable, or are there hidden costs lurking? And of course, as an investor, I care about that because I'm not investing in a company where it is now. I'm investing in where it's going. And so understanding how the finances shift over time is really helpful. So just to recap, make sure you have clarity around the problem. Is it a problem worth solving? And are people willing to pay for it? You've got to make sure that the solution is something the customers actually need and make sure to include that in the deck. And finally, have really good clarity around your business model. How are you going to attract these customers and how are you going to extract as much value from them as you can? Make sure you don't spend too much time on the product. So the investors care about the future, and that future hasn't been built yet. If you talk about your current product, you're per definition talking about the product the way it is today, but that's not what your investors are investing in. Make sure you don't stop talking before you've made your point. You can't just hit at profitability without quantifying it and where you're going with it. And it's really important to remember to explain how your company is going to evolve over time. How do you get economies of scale? And how does it get better as you get more experience with the product you're building? Now, I only actually gave feedback on the stuff that was there, but there was a bunch of stuff that wasn't too. Like there was nothing about target customers, nothing about marketing or sales strategy, nothing about revenue models or the funding ask and use of funds. Now, I have an extended rant on why you need all of that too, so check out the post on TechCrunch. Remember, if you want to submit your pitch deck to my Pitch Deck Teardown series, check out today's article in the show notes and follow the Submit Your Deck link. That's it for today's episode, but don't worry, Equity will be back on Wednesday when I'm being joined by VC Jenny Fielding about the Series A Chasm. If you want to keep up with us in the meantime, you can follow Equity on X and Threads under the handle @EquityPod. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk again soon.
Equity is produced by Teresa Loconsolo with editing by Kel. Bryce Durbin is our illustrator, and we'd like to give a big thanks to our audience development team and Henry Pickavett, who manages TechCrunch audio products. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.